Since the beginning of American history, the concept of racial discrimination and inequality has been prevalent in society. It is evident through actions, laws, words, and even through the politics of our own very country. In this video, we will be discussing the role of politics in American history, beginning with 1776 and ending with 1877. During this 100-year span, the effect that politics has on race and discrimination is demonstrated vividly, but it is important to start with the colonization of America. In 1492, as famously written, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but he was not the only one. Numerous European nations were on the hunt for territory in North America, but Columbus got lucky. With him on the journey were African slaves, and in order to obtain a territory for his motherland of Spain, he needed to conquer the Native Americans. This act thus begins the story of the powerful white man and the powerlessness of any other race on the planet. This belief can be further emphasized through the words of a German philosopher named George Hegel. He believed that technologically advanced societies not only leads to moral and ethical values, but also is the route towards world peace. This belief by Hegel echoes the idea that in order to be advanced in the world, which thus leads to power and a higher ranking on the social hierarchy, one must strive to be like the Europeans. Columbus, being from Europe himself, allowed him and the entire country of Spain and surrounding countries to be successful in European colonization within the New World. Furthermore, Hegel is not the only philosopher who believed in the idea of a social hierarchy in which those who are not advanced in some aspect are not superior in contrast to those who do. Ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle believed that those who are the best and highest ends of society have the right and duty to be the lawmakers of that society. This is essential to the idea of a social hierarchy because in order to be a lawmaker, one must have reason, and according to the era of enlightenment and to the minds of many philosophers, reason is a hierarchy in and of itself. In order to be technologically advanced, one must have reason to understand the idea of technology and how it can improve, and once that is achieved, then superiority is gained. You may now be asking how this is related to American history all in all, and the answer is that there are so many ways in which this is comparable to what has happened during the time period of 1776 to 1877 and beyond. Going in chronological order, the United States of America was built on a foundation based upon a few men considered to be our founding fathers and a document written and signed in 1776. This document, something still considered to be important to this day, is called the Declaration of Independence. Not only that, but 13 years later, in 1789, another document was created which consisted of even more laws and more concepts that are supposed to guide the country and its future leaders into maintaining the reputation and stability of the country in a positive manner. These documents are created by the lawmakers. All these lawmakers, these founding fathers, were unsurprisingly all white, Caucasian men. As lawmakers, this meant that they were technologically advanced and that they had enough reason to become the superior ones of the social hierarchy that already existed within the colonies. This superiority thus allowed the lawmakers to exclude women and slaves, the people that they thought would hinder the country's progress in technological and societal advancement in the long run. Furthermore, it is clear that South Carolina's presence during the Constitutional Convention of 1787 moved the words and meanings of the Constitution to shift ever so slightly in favor of slavery. They insisted, as a state, that racial slavery should be protected by the Constitution because of its economic benefits for the country as a whole. For this reason, it is believed that the Constitution is vague in order to hint at the possibility of support for racism and slavery in spite of its societal consequences in order to gain economically. But Skipping ahead to modern-day United States society, it is believed that these documents are now open to interpretation in which anybody, women, men, anyone of any type of race, are able to take up the role of quote-unquote man and as quote-unquote people. This change in the belief system could be interpreted in many ways. One way is that the idea of democracy, the political system in which this country was primarily based off of, has evolved over its 200 plus years of existence. To elaborate, according to John Locke's two treatises of government, democracy is defined as the consent of being ruled, and if there is a lack of consent, then a revolution occurs. This definition is important in context of the wars in American history that occur later on in the timeline, but also in context of the tension within society between those with evident differences. Furthermore, in 1793, Eli Whitney became a hit sensation upon inventing the cotton gin. This product allowed for a greater cotton production, but at the cost of slaves. The cotton gin greatly increased the amount of slave labor needed in the United States, but especially in the South. This need for cotton not only created the rapid incoming of slaves from Africa, but also began the divide within the country that was once so whole. Eventually, the 1800s roll in and election season begins. No matter which candidate was making their plea and campaigning, one topic was wholly avoided: slavery. During these elections, and many more to come after, the idea of slavery was considered as something like a taboo, and thus both Democratic and Whig parties always tried their best to steer away from the topic entirely in order to avoid any confrontations from possible voters. Eventually, Congress does halt the importation of slaves from Africa and even creates a permanent ban on the act altogether, but this becomes problematic within the years to come. On April 30th of 1803, a major purchase of $15 million, known as the Louisiana Purchase, was completed by Thomas Jefferson, which conclusively added 828,000 square miles in area west of the Mississippi River. This purchase not only significantly added to the size of the country, but also kick-started the beliefs of a little something called Manifest Destiny. Manifest destiny is a phrase that is defined as an attempt to make heaven on earth, because it is when one group/culture believes that they have a duty to God to pull the rest of humanity towards their highest potential. The purchase is an example of manifest destiny because the colonists of America were trying to create more land in order to attract more people to come to their country and teach them their ways of life. Unfortunately, the purchase implemented by the president only resulted in chaos and further divisions within the country. According to John Winthrop's City Upon a Hill, it is necessary for all peoples within a community to work as if they were one entity in order to end with not only a successful attempt to become a better society, but to also successfully be a part of democracy, which once again is built upon consent and to please the goals that God has given them, which is to create that heaven on earth. For these reasons, Manifest Destiny is in full action during this time period, but like stated before, this attempt of creating a city upon a hill is unsuccessful in many ways. For example, on August 1st of 1831, a slave rebellion led by a man named Nat Turner occurred in Virginia, which resulted in over 60 white men, women, and children dead, and a very heavy consequence on the entire slave population. They were punished through the beginning of enforced slave codes, limited black movement, and prohibition of any slave from learning how to read. The last part is key to the eyes of early and modern philosophers. In general, one must know how to read and have some part of intelligence level in order to reason well and in a successful manner. If the ability to read is stripped away from slaves, then that means their reasoning is also being taken away, and thus pushing them to the lowest stature on the social hierarchy. This means that they cannot be at their best and highest level of performance as people and as reasoners, and also takes away their ability to advance technologically and therefore advance in society in any type of way. Furthermore, the fact that slaves were not given the right to read because of white punishment only emphasizes the lack of a democracy and the beginning of white supremacy. Not only is their reasoning, but also the equality and freedom that is granted to them by God. Eventually, more states were added to the continental United States, and thus inciting the infamous battles over which states would have slaves and which would not. For this reason, in 1848, a senator from Illinois named Stephen Douglas said that the local residents should be able to decide the slavery question and thus allows Congress to stay out of it. This was essentially identified as popular sovereignty. Unfortunately, national politics became a key factor in deciding the slavery dilemma in the end, with the Compromise of 1850, Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, and Kansas-Nebraska Act. These three laws were once again created by the lawmakers, which, like noted earlier, are the ones who are the best of society and are ranked at the top of the hierarchy, as Kant would philosophize. But the sad part is that since these laws are being created by the most intelligent and the most reasonable people in the country, they became the ideal politicians and belief system that the citizens had in their government. The constant denial of equality and freedom for slaves and Africans in general led to a community with no history, no culture, and no civilization, which are three important aspects of morality. As said earlier, the early Europeans and settlers took morality away from slaves as well because of their now lack of resources to be able to learn how to read and reason. Years pass and Honest Abe Lincoln becomes a prominent figure in the fight against slavery. As president starting on November 6 of 1860, he also faced problems when South Carolina voted their state out of the Union. This move by South Carolina not only further helped support the idea that they influenced the Constitution negatively, as discussed in the earlier part of this video, but also clearly demonstrates the divide within the United States. This move, as probably foreshadowed, led to the Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865. While in the midst of war, Lincoln courageously gave his Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863, which declared that in the 10 rebelling states of the South that the slaves were declared free. If Aristotle were still around, he would consider Lincoln to be a natural master, and those ignorant would be the natural slaves. Why, you might ask? It's comprehensible that Lincoln is a reasonable man who craves the return for democracy, so that his country, even the Africans, gave consent to be ruled by him. Because of the lack of consent for the superior white population, a revolution occurred known as the Civil War. In the middle of the war, on November 19, 1863, Lincoln delivered his famous Gettysburg Address, which was a speech that emphasized the divided nation, the need for equality for all people, and how the war was being fought for a reason that should be innate to known for mankind. However, not everyone had enough reason and morality to understand this concept. Surprisingly, it is not the Africans who had this problem, but rather the whites. For this reason, during this time period, President Lincoln was assassinated, which further elevated the tension between the North and South and made it clear that the concept of slavery was a hot topic of discussion for all. One positive that resulted from this bloodbath was the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery and guaranteed equal rights of citizenship to African Americans. All in all, the philosophies of the past and present are able to help us as a society to find out the causes and effects of race and discrimination based on the history of the United States of America. The result of the first 100 plus years of American history helps to emphasize the divide between whites and blacks in order to retrieve not only power, but also to degrade others in order to feel superior. It is unfortunate, but it is definitely true. If only they knew that they knew not.